Okay, sorry. The boys were letting me know that Mando had thrown up on the floor upstairs. So, good connection to the digestive system, I guess. So, anyway, this book, we can tell just by looking at it, this is going to be a fictional book. Now, by looking at the cover, give me an estimate or a prediction as to why we would be reading this book when we're supposed to be talking about the digestive system. So look at the cover, you see three people, you see what looks like a giant pot, we have a spoon, some smells coming off of it. We're not quite sure what's in there, but we can make a prediction from the title. Stone soup, it's probably soup. That's probably the biggest bowl of soup I have ever seen. Or in this case, it's probably a kettle. One word I want us to remember is community. We've talked about the idea of community. It's a group of people living together, working together, and hopefully looking out for each other. That's something I want you to remember as we read this, okay? So it says, 3 soldiers trudged down a road in a strange country. They were on their way home from the wars. Besides being tired, they were hungry. In fact, they had eaten nothing for 2 days. Now look at that picture. We can probably tell by their uniforms that this is not something that happened like yesterday. They're wearing swords. We know we don't wear swords in the battle anymore. Probably 100 or 200 years ago. We also know they're really hungry and they're on their own. They're walking home. They're not being flown or driving in an airplane or even a train. So that also kind of helps us to make a prediction as to when this is taking place. How I would like a good dinner tonight, said the first, and a bed to sleep in, said the second. But all that is impossible, said the third. We must march on. On they marched. Suddenly, ahead of them, they saw the lights of a village. Maybe we'll find a bite to eat there, said the first. And a loft to sleep in, said the second. No harm in asking, said the third. Now, the peasants of that place feared strangers. So peasants are people who live in a village who typically aren't very wealthy, don't have a lot. When they heard the 3 soldiers were coming down the road, they talked amongst themselves. Here come 3 soldiers. Soldiers are always hungry, but we have little enough for ourselves. And they hurried to hide their food. They pushed sacks of barley under the hay in the lofts. They lowered buckets of milk down the wells. They spread old quilts over the carrot beds. They hid their cabbages and potatoes under the beds. They hung their meat in the cellars. They hid all they had to eat. Then they waited. So we can tell, well, this is a community. This is definitely not a community that's ready to share. The soldiers stopped first at the house of Paul and I can't say this name. Francos? Good evening to you, they said. Could you spare a bit of food for 3 hungry soldiers? We have had no food ourselves for 3 days, said Paul. Francos made a sad face. It has been a poor harvest. So they're not telling the truth there, obviously. So that tells a little bit about the characters of the people living in this community. The 3 soldiers went on to the house of Albert and Luis. Could you spare a bit of food and have you some corner where we could sleep for the night? Oh no, said Albert. We gave all we could spare to soldiers who came before you. Our beds are full, said Luis. At Vincent and Marie's, the answer was the same. It had been a poor harvest, and all the grain must be kept for seed. So it went through all the village. Not a peasant had any food to give away. They all had good reasons. One family used the grain for feed. That means to feed their cattle. Another had an old sick father to care for. All had too many mouths to fill. The villagers stood in the street and sighed. They looked as hungry as they could. The three soldiers talked together. Now, maybe you've heard a variation of this book. Maybe this book sounds familiar to a story that you've read, or even a movie or a TV show that you've seen. Maybe you haven't seen or heard it. But at this point, you probably have enough information about the villagers and enough information about the soldiers that you can make a prediction. Make a prediction as to what the soldiers and the villagers are going to do next. And definitely use that cover as a hint for you as well. Okay? I will talk to you guys tomorrow. See you then.